What happens when two of Hollywood's most beloved personalities sit down for what should be a light-hearted chat, only for it to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history? Today we're breaking down every single word, every pause, every micro-expression from the interview that has the entire entertainment industry buzzing. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me your initial thoughts on this whole situation. Because trust me, you're going to have plenty to say by the end of this video. Kelly Clarkson starts the interview the way she always does. Warm, bubbly, that signature smile lighting up the studio. Colin Farrell walks out to massive applause, looking relaxed, waving to the audience with that easy charm he's known for. They exchange pleasantries. He compliments the set. She jokes about his latest project. Everything seems perfectly normal, perfectly scripted, perfectly safe. But within minutes, the entire atmosphere shifts in a way nobody in that studio could have predicted. Kelly leans forward with genuine curiosity and asks Colin about his approach to selecting roles, particularly his recent string of dramatic performances. It's a softball question, the kind actors get asked a dozen times during press tours. Colin starts answering thoughtfully, talking about how he looks for characters with depth, with complexity, with real human struggles that audiences can connect with. He's articulate, engaging, giving Kelly exactly the kind of content her show thrives on. The audience is nodding along, completely invested in what he's saying. Then Kelly does what she always does. She tries to dig a little deeper. She mentions that some critics have noted a pattern in his recent work, that he seems drawn to characters dealing with addiction, violence, or moral ambiguity. She phrases it as an observation, not a criticism, but there's something about the way she says it that makes Colin pause mid-sentence. His expression doesn't change dramatically, but if you watch closely, you can see his jaw tighten just slightly. He takes a breath before responding. Colin's response starts measured. He acknowledges that yes, those themes appear in his work, but he pushes back gently on the idea that it's a deliberate pattern. He talks about how actors don't always have complete control over what projects come their way, how the industry often typecasts, how sometimes you take roles because you need to work, because you believe in the director, because the script speaks to something personal even if it's uncomfortable. Kelly nods along, seeming to accept this explanation, but then she makes a decision that changes everything. She references a specific interview Colin gave years ago, one where he discussed his own personal struggles in his 20s. She doesn't quote it directly at first, she just alludes to it, suggesting that perhaps his role choices aren't as random as he's claiming, that maybe there's a through line between his past experiences and the characters he's drawn to now. The audience goes quiet. You can feel the shift in energy. This is no longer a fun celebrity chat. This has become something else entirely. Colin's posture changes completely. He sits back in his chair, and when he speaks, his voice has lost all its warmth. He tells Kelly that he's aware of the interview she's referencing, that he gave it during a very specific time in his life when he was trying to be open and honest about mental health and recovery. He says he did it because he thought it might help people who were going through similar struggles. That vulnerability was the point. But then he says something that cuts through the studio like a knife. He tells her that he didn't share those experiences so that journalists could use them as a lens to analyze his entire career. Kelly immediately tries to clarify. She insists that wasn't her intention, that she was simply trying to understand his artistic process, that the connection seemed natural to explore. Her voice is apologetic but also slightly defensive. She's a professional. She's conducted thousands of interviews, and she clearly doesn't appreciate the implication that she's crossed a line. Colin doesn't back down, though. He tells her that intent doesn't always matter, that the impact of bringing up someone's personal trauma in a public forum has consequences regardless of how carefully you phrase the questions. The audience is completely silent now. Some people look uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others are leaning forward, transfixed by what's unfolding. Kelly's producers must be losing their minds in the control room because this is live television, and there's no way to edit this out, no way to smooth it over. This is happening in real time for millions of viewers. Kelly takes a different approach. She acknowledges Colin's point, but suggests that as a public figure who chose to share those experiences, he must have known they would become part of the public conversation around his work. She says it gently, not accusingly, but the implication is clear: you can't put something out there and then be upset when people reference it. Colin's response is immediate and sharp. He tells her there's a difference between the public conversation and a direct question from a talk show host who's using his past pain as a jumping-off point for entertainment. That word, entertainment, hangs in the air. Kelly visibly reacts to it. She reminds Colin that this is her show, that everything they do here is technically entertainment, that he agreed to come on knowing the format. But she also says that she takes her interviews seriously, that she prepares extensively, that she genuinely cares about having meaningful conversations with her guests. Colin nods slowly and says that's exactly his point. If she cares about meaningful conversations, then she should understand why turning someone's recovery journey into a theory about their acting choices isn't meaningful. It's reductive. The tension is unbearable now. Kelly's smile has completely vanished. She's no longer the cheerful host. She's someone who feels genuinely attacked on her own show. She tells Colin that she respects his perspective, but that he's mischaracterizing her question. That literary analysis and psychological analysis of artists has been happening for centuries. That it's not an attack to notice patterns in someone's work. Colin fires back that there's a difference between literary analysis and amateur psychoanalysis, especially when it involves real trauma that someone lived through. Kelly's voice gets firmer. She points out that Colin has spent his entire career in the public eye, that he's given hundreds of interviews, that he's discussed these topics before without issue. She asks him directly why this conversation, why her question specifically, has triggered such a strong reaction. And that's when Colin says something that makes everyone in the studio gasp. He tells her that maybe the problem is that he's spent too many years letting interviewers treat his life like a case study, and he's finally reached the point where he's done pretending it's okay. The camera zooms in on Kelly's face. She's processing this in real time, trying to figure out how to respond, how to salvage this interview, how to protect both her guest and her show. She takes a visible breath and says she never intended to make him feel that way. That if her question came across as insensitive, she sincerely apologizes. But then she adds something that reignites everything. She says that as someone who has also been open about her own struggles, she thought she was creating a safe space for that kind of honest dialogue. Colin's laugh is bitter, humorless. He tells Kelly that comparing their situations is false equivalence, that her struggles, while valid, have been received and processed by the public in a completely different way than his have. He says that women in the industry often get praised for vulnerability while men get pigeonholed, that his openness about addiction has followed him in ways that have actively harmed his career, that casting directors have passed on him for roles because they worry he's unreliable, that insurance companies have raised rates on productions he's attached to. This revelation stuns everyone. Kelly clearly had no idea that Colin's honesty had resulted in professional consequences. Her entire demeanor changes. She starts to respond with empathy, saying she had no idea that his transparency had cost him opportunities, that she assumed Hollywood had evolved past that kind of discrimination. Colin shakes his head and tells her that's the problem with assumptions. Everyone thinks the industry is more progressive than it actually is. But the reality is that admitting to past struggles still gets you labeled as a liability. Kelly tries to pivot the conversation. She tells Colin that she understands his frustration, that she can see how her question touched a nerve. But she also wants to acknowledge that his work speaks for itself, that his talent is undeniable regardless of what anyone thinks about his personal history. Colin cuts her off mid-sentence and asks her point-blank, then why bring it up at all? If his work speaks for itself, why did she feel the need to connect it to his personal trauma? Why couldn't they just talk about the craft, the process, the actual art of acting? The question hangs there, and Kelly doesn't have a good answer. She stumbles over her words, saying something about context, about understanding the whole person, about audiences wanting to connect with the human behind the performance. Colin doesn't let her finish. He tells her that what audiences actually want is to be entertained, to escape their own problems for a while, and that by constantly dragging actors' personal lives into the spotlight, the industry is destroying that escape for everyone. Kelly pushes back on this. She says that authenticity is what makes entertainment meaningful, that people don't just want escapism anymore, they want reality. They want to see themselves reflected in the stories and the people telling those stories. Colin's response is sharp. He tells her that there's a difference between authenticity and exploitation, that just because audiences are hungry for reality doesn't mean celebrities owe them access to their deepest wounds, that vulnerability should be a choice, not an expectation. The audience is completely split at this point. You can see some people nodding in agreement with Colin, others looking sympathetic toward Kelly. The energy in the room is chaotic, uncomfortable, electric. Kelly takes another approach, trying to find middle ground. She tells Colin that she hears what he's saying, that she appreciates him being honest about how her question made him feel, and that going forward she'll be more mindful about how she frames these kinds of discussions. But Colin isn't satisfied with that response. He tells her that it's not just about being more mindful, it's about fundamentally rethinking what these interviews are supposed to accomplish. He asks her if she's ever considered that maybe the entire format is broken, that maybe these promotional tours and talk show appearances do more harm than good, that maybe actors should just let their work speak for itself without having to perform their personalities and trauma for public consumption. Kelly looks genuinely taken aback by this. She reminds Colin that he's sitting on her show right now, that he agreed to do this interview, that if he feels so strongly about the format being broken, he didn't have to come. Colin acknowledges this, saying she's absolutely right, that he's complicit in the system he's criticizing, that he shows up to these things because his contract requires it, because the studio needs him to promote the film, because saying no would tank his career even faster than being honest about his past already has. This admission shifts the dynamic again. Kelly softens slightly, recognizing that Colin isn't just angry at her specifically, he's frustrated with an entire industry structure that neither of them fully controls. She tells him that she gets it, that she's felt trapped by expectations too, that even as a host with her own show, she has network executives and sponsors and audience expectations that dictate what she can and cannot say. Colin nods, and for the first time since this whole thing started, there's a flicker of mutual understanding between them. But that moment of understanding doesn't last long. Kelly, perhaps feeling like she's found an opening, suggests that maybe the solution is for them to have more honest conversations like this one, that maybe if more celebrities were willing to push back in real time, the industry would have to change. Colin stares at her for a long moment before asking if she's serious, if she really thinks that him having a breakdown on daytime television is going to reform an entire system built on commodifying human vulnerability. Kelly insists that's not what she meant, that she's simply saying that change has to start somewhere, that difficult conversations are necessary even when they're uncomfortable. Colin's response is cutting. He tells her that this isn't a difficult conversation, it's a spectacle, that every second of his discomfort is being recorded and will be clipped and shared and analyzed across every social media platform, that his frustration is about to become content, which is exactly the problem he's been trying to articulate. The audience shifts uncomfortably. Some people are pulling out their phones, probably already thinking about what they're going to post about this encounter. Kelly notices this too, and you can see the realization cross her face that Colin is absolutely right. She's quiet for a moment, genuinely seeming to grapple with the implications of what he's saying. Then she does something unexpected. She turns to the camera and acknowledges that this has become a difficult interview, that maybe they need to take a break. Colin immediately says no. He tells her that taking a break would be worse, that it would give the producers time to figure out how to spin this, how to edit it, how to control the narrative. He says if they're going to do this, they need to do it in real time. No breaks, no do-overs, no carefully crafted apologies written by publicists. Kelly looks uncertain but agrees, telling her producers to keep rolling. The energy in the studio becomes even more intense. Everyone knows they're witnessing something unprecedented. Kelly takes a deep breath and asks Colin what he wants from this conversation. Not what he wants from her specifically, but what outcome he's hoping for by pushing back this hard, this publicly. Colin considers the question seriously. He says honestly he doesn't know, that he didn't come here planning to do this, that something about her question just broke something in him that's been building for years. He talks about the exhaustion of always having to be on, always having to perform gratitude and humility and accessibility, always having to pretend that invasive questions are just part of the job. Kelly listens, really listens this time, without interrupting or trying to defend herself. When Colin finishes, she asks him if he's ever told anyone in the industry how much this bothers him, if he's ever tried to set boundaries in private before it got to this point. Colin laughs again, but this time it's not bitter, it's just tired. He tells her that he's tried, that he's had conversations with publicists and managers and producers about what topics should be off-limits. But those boundaries get ignored the moment someone thinks a question will get a good reaction. This seems to strike a chord with Kelly. She admits that she's guilty of this too, that there have been times when she's pushed guests on sensitive topics because she knew it would make for compelling television, that the pressure to deliver ratings and viral moments sometimes overrides her better judgment. Colin appreciates the honesty but points out that acknowledging the problem isn't the same as fixing it, that every interviewer who's ever made him uncomfortable has also claimed to understand and respect boundaries while simultaneously violating them. Kelly asks what would actually fixing it look like. Colin says he wishes he knew, that maybe there's no solution as long as celebrity culture functions the way it does, as long as audiences demand constant access and authenticity and entertainment all rolled into one impossible package. He says maybe the only real answer is for people like him to stop participating entirely, to do the work and skip the publicity circus. But that's not realistic in an industry where visibility equals viability. The conversation has shifted from confrontation to something more philosophical, more raw. Kelly brings up the fact that she's also been on the other side of this, that she's been interviewed countless times and has had her own difficult moments with invasive questions, particularly about her personal life and relationships. She asks Colin if he thinks there's a difference between what male and female celebrities endure in these situations, circling back to his earlier comment about gender and vulnerability. Colin admits that he probably oversimplified that point, that both men and women face unique challenges in the public eye, but that the specific ways their vulnerabilities get weaponized are different. He says women get praised for emotional openness, but then get called too emotional when it's inconvenient, while men get told to open up about mental health but then get treated as damaged goods when they act. That answer seems to resonate with Colin. He tells her that's exactly the kind of honesty that's missing from these spaces. That ability to say, I don't know, I need to think about it, instead of having a prepared response for everything. Kelly smiles slightly, the first genuine smile since this whole thing started, and says that maybe they've both learned something today, even if it was painful to get there. Colin agrees, but adds that learning something doesn't mean the system will change, that tomorrow there will be another actor on another talk show answering another invasive question, and the cycle will continue. Kelly doesn't disagree, but she suggests that maybe individual moments of resistance matter, that maybe every time someone pushes back, it creates a tiny crack in the foundation, and enough cracks eventually lead to collapse. Colin looks skeptical but says he hopes she's right, that he wants to believe that this conversation will mean something beyond just becoming a viral moment that people dissect and debate for a few days before moving on to the next controversy. The audience has been silent for so long that when someone finally coughs, it sounds jarring, almost intrusive. Kelly glances at the audience and then back at Colin, seemingly remembering that they're not alone in this conversation, that hundreds of people are watching them live and millions more will watch later. She asks Colin if he wants to say anything directly to the people watching, if there's a message he wants to get across before they end this. Colin thinks about it, then addresses the camera directly. He says that if anyone out there has ever felt pressured to share more of themselves than they're comfortable with, whether in a professional setting or personal one, they have the right to say no, to set boundaries, to protect their own story. He says vulnerability is powerful, but it should never be coerced or expected. That real strength sometimes looks like refusing to perform your pain for other people's consumption. The studio is absolutely silent, everyone absorbing what he's saying. Kelly adds her own message to the audience. She says that as someone who asks the questions, who creates the platform for these conversations, she's going to be more thoughtful about the line between curiosity and intrusion, that she's grateful to Colin for being willing to have this hard conversation, even though it would have been easier for both of them to just stick to the script. She says she hopes the audience can take something meaningful from this, rather than just treating it as drama or entertainment. Colin nods appreciatively at Kelly's words. There's a moment of silence between them. Not awkward this time, but contemplative. Both of them seeming to realize that they've reached some kind of conclusion, even if nothing has been fully resolved. Kelly asks Colin if there's anything else he wants to talk about. Any other thoughts he wants to share before they wrap up. Colin says he thinks they've covered enough ground for one day, that he's exhausted and imagines she is too. Kelly admits that yes, this has been emotionally draining in a way that most interviews aren't, but also strangely valuable, that she'll be thinking about this conversation for a long time. Colin says the same, that whatever happens with the fallout from this, he doesn't regret speaking up, that staying silent to keep everyone comfortable wasn't serving him or anyone else. Kelly thanks him for his honesty, for his willingness to engage even when it got difficult, for trusting that they could work through it together. Colin thanks her as well, acknowledging that she could have shut the conversation down at any point, could have gone to commercial and regrouped, but instead she stayed in it with him. He says that takes courage too, especially when you're the one hosting the show and you're responsible for how everything plays out. Kelly looks genuinely touched by this, saying she didn't feel particularly courageous in the moment, mostly just confused and defensive, but she appreciates him recognizing that she tried. They shake hands, a formal gesture that feels oddly appropriate given everything that's just transpired. The audience finally breaks their silence with applause, though it's uncertain, scattered, people not quite sure what they're applauding for, or whether applause is even the right response to what they've just witnessed. Colin waves to the crowd as he stands up, and Kelly stands too, walking him off the stage in a show of solidarity that feels important, even if symbolic. As Colin exits, Kelly turns back to the camera alone. Her expression is complex, a mixture of relief and concern, and something else harder to identify. She tells the audience that this was definitely not the interview she expected to have today, that she's still processing everything that was said, and that she hopes viewers will approach the conversation with nuance and empathy, rather than just picking sides. She says that growth happens in uncomfortable moments, and today was certainly uncomfortable, but maybe that means it mattered. Kelly wraps up the show with her usual closing remarks, but her delivery is different, more subdued, less polished. She seems genuinely shaken by the experience, but also somehow more present, more real than she usually appears on camera. As the show cuts to commercial, you can see her sitting back down in her chair, exhaling deeply, the weight of what just happened finally hitting her, now that the cameras have stopped rolling on her face. The internet explodes within minutes. Clips of the exchange are everywhere, people analyzing every word, every facial expression, every pause. Some defend Colin, praising him for setting boundaries and speaking truth about the exploitation inherent in celebrity culture. Others defend Kelly, arguing that she was doing her job and that Colin overreacted to a reasonable question. Some people think they're both right, that the conversation exposed real problems in how we consume and create entertainment. Think pieces start appearing within hours. Mental health advocates weigh in on the discussion about trauma and public disclosure. Industry insiders discuss the pressure actors face during promotional tours. Media critics analyze the format of talk shows and whether they need to evolve. Everyone has an opinion about who was right, who was wrong, what should have been said differently, what this means for the future of celebrity interviews. But perhaps the most interesting response comes from other actors and entertainers who start sharing their own stories about difficult interview experiences, about times they felt their boundaries were crossed, about the exhaustion of constantly performing accessibility and gratitude. The conversation Colin and Kelly had doesn't solve anything immediately, but it opens a door, creates space for people to admit that the current system isn't working for anyone, that something needs to change even if no one quite knows what that change should look like yet. So what do you think about all of this? Did Colin cross a line by confronting Kelly so directly on her own show? Or was he right to call out the pattern of invasive questioning? Was Kelly wrong to bring up his personal history? Or was she just doing what talk show hosts have always done? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because this conversation is far from over.